Ellensburg, Washington, sun shone so bright. Beautiful day for a game.
Good morning. My name is Sierra, and I light this chalice for a free and responsible search for truth and meaning.
Please stand as you are able and join in the affirmation of our covenant. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please be seated. I ask you to look around at the people around you. And if you can do the Exorcist movie thing, just sort of turn your head all the way around and look at those behind you. We'll skip the review of breakfast. And imagine you have a mirror and you can see yourself. Every one of those people, including yourself, benefits if we fund our values here at All Souls. And today our fund will go to our general budget. And when I asked about 6 months ago for the general budget, I proposed a challenge. It was the pizza challenge. And what I requested was that in addition to what you had pledged, each month add the price of one pizza. I don't know how many people accepted that. But if each person would do that, we could have a significant bump up in the resources available to us. So keep in mind all of those around you, keep in mind yourself as we benefit from funding our values. The offering will now be given and gratefully received. Please join me now in the dedication of our offering to the good works that it can achieve. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change toward a just and compassionate society.
This is a poem called The Summer Day by one of my favorite poets, Mary Oliver. Who made the world? Who made the swan and the black bear? Who made the grasshopper? This grasshopper, I mean, the one who has flung herself out of the grass, the one who is eating sugar out of my hand, who is moving her jaws back and forth instead of up and down, who is gazing around with her enormous and complicated eyes. Now she lifts her pale forearms and thoroughly washes her face. Now she snaps her wings open and floats away. I don't know exactly what a prayer is. I do know how to pay attention, how to fall down into the grass, how to kneel down in the grass, how to be idle and blessed, how to stroll through the fields, which is what I have been doing all day. Tell me, what else should I have done? Doesn't everything die at last and too soon? Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?
You know, a 20th century philosopher from this country once professed When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Well, like Yogi Berra, I've taken a few forks, as I'm sure all of us have. Forks are often milestones where we make a conscious decision. Among choices, fortune, fame, power, position, adventure, love, justice, or a combination of them. I think most of my choices have been in the love and justice category, and adventure certainly has had a lot to do with it. Sometimes they're just happenings or imprintings from childhood. I picked up a guitar my freshman year in college. Every guy was playing guitar, and my ego told me that I had way more musical ability than they did. And if they can play guitar, I can play guitar. So I bought a guitar for $20 that had a hole in the bottom of it in the wrong place. And my first songs were love songs that I wrote for the guys in the dorm who had girlfriends in the women's dorms. And then I would go over to the women's dorms and serenade their sweeties under their windows. And that was my start. I knew I was on my way. I soon morphed into the civil rights and the anti-war music, and now, 50-plus years later, regardless of all the alphabet of letters that come after my name, here I am, following my bliss, my passion, my love in Kansas City. The music is my calling. I think it always was. In the summer of '69 in upstate New York, I confronted some white guys who were using disparaging language based on the pigmentation of one's skin. And these slurs were very violent ones, and I expressed my displeasure with their language in frolic. In hindsight, I recognize that I wasn't particularly tactful, probably a bit abrupt, and maybe even perceived as confrontational. But, remember the cartoons with Wile E. Coyote, the Roadrunner cartoons, and Wile would run into the stone side of a mountain or something, and his body would turn into a jigsaw of pieces and fall to the ground. Well, that's how my head felt. And then the blood started trickling, and then, got it?
Push the button.
Oh, I pushed the button. Oh, gosh, I censored myself there. Maybe somebody else's hand was at work with that one. And then the blood started trickling down my glasses, and if not the beginning of wisdom, it did teach me something about the violence of white supremacy. Well, my mom would never go to sleep at night until we got home. She said, "You'll understand when you're a parent." And so sometimes my brother and I would find her asleep on the couch. We could tiptoe by her and go upstairs and then make up some time that we got home and she was sleeping. We didn't want to bother her, but she was awake that night. And she looked at me and she said, "What happened?" And I thought, how did she know something had happened? Of course, I had no idea what my face looked like because the blood had all dried in my beard, and I didn't know that. And so I told her, and she looked at me and she said, "I'm proud of you. Now go wash your face and go to bed." She could have freaked out. She could have said, "Why did you do that? What were you thinking of? Why were you even there? Why? But getting my head cut open was secondary to her, to the fact that I had stood up for someone's human right. And I've been trying to wash my face ever since then. It was important to her that I did the right thing. And as I reflect on her 99 years that she taught that through just her expressed love for humanity and the earth, and showed me how to do the right thing, both by example and her affirmation. And her affirmation was huge. Dr. King said doing the right thing isn't always easy, but it's always the right thing to do. At Riverside Church in '67, he said the U.S. is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world, and emphasized that I cannot be silent. There comes a time, said Dr. King, that one must take a position that is neither politic nor popular nor safe. Because in the end, he said, we'll remember not the silence, not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. Well, the following year, 3 months after Dr. King's assassination and 3 months before Che's, I decided to leave the country like I had mentioned last night. I grew up on a little dairy farm milking cows, and I came to the conclusion that I had more in common with Vietnamese farmers than I did with the Wall Street brokers who wanted to pay me to go shoot them. I grew up in a little Methodist church that had an outhouse out back. We heated with a wood stove. And a mom who taught me performance art, directed the church choir, played the organ till she was 90. She taught me performance art, taught me not to hurt people, clean up my mess, that segregation was criminal, arrive early for work, show up when you say you're going to show up, and that the audience was my friend. I grew up with Audie Murphy and John Wayne, and probably all of us remember that imprinting from childhood. Where I grew up, we all learned to hunt. We all learned to shoot a rifle because we were protecting our livestock from varmints, and it was also a way to put food on the table. And it was, for many, it was an easy transition from shooting varmints to thinking, well, that other people were just another sort of varmint. When I had decided to leave the country, some people told me, well, join the Navy because that's the lesser evil. And I said, well, it's still evil. It's still part of the system. And I don't want to support that system. And other people said, well, let the Army draft you, then get in the National Army Choir. Even if you have to enlist, that's no evil at all. And I says, well, yes, it is, because it's still representing the military, and I don't want to do that. Argentine folk musician Leon Gieco, who had to leave his country during the Perón years, has a song called Solo le pido a Dios que no me sea indiferente. All I ask of God is that I not be indifferent to war, not be indifferent to suffering, not be indifferent to injustice. The poet Mary Oliver, whose poem Lynn just read, said that love was paying attention. Love is not indifference. And Rabbi Abraham Heschel, who you may remember from the Civil Rights Movement, said, the opposite of good is not evil. The opposite of good is not bad. The opposite of good, he said, was indifference. Meanwhile, as regards my relationship to the military, you got drafted, you went in the Army, or else you were a coward or a commie, and upon graduation, I left the country and went to South America. And for the next 20 years, crossed every longitude and most of the latitudes. And through that whole time, my mom was my executive secretary, handling all the correspondence and all the finances, including a warrant for my arrest by the New York State Police, which she took care of. Dr. King said, I am disappointed, have great disappointment in America. And he said there can be no great disappointment with anything unless there is great love. And I don't know if I ever found myself having great love within my disappointment for America, but I did find a great love for the world. Dr. King said, "A time comes when silence is betrayal." And I think I remember wondering how I could not be silent, and the best way that I could remember was with my music and my writing, to speak and sing my truth about what I had seen, what I had experienced with my travels. Now, Matt Taibbi in Hate Incorporated writes how the mass media has degenerated into not only being a purveyor of gossip and conspiracy theories and salacious entertainment, but most ominously a purveyor of hate. And Martin Luther King said, "I have decided to stick with love because hate is too great a burden." So that's been another one I have always perhaps struggled with. Anyway, I left the country in 1970, and 2 weeks after I was in Colombia, South America, Salvador Allende was elected president of Chile, and I thought, boy, I am on my way to the Tropic of Capricorn when I finish my work in Colombia. Said author Joseph Campbell, "We must be willing to get rid of the life we have planned so as to live the life that is waiting for us." Now, this journey for justice loves parallel with love. It is intrinsic, as Dr. King said. It's head on and sideways, it's hand in hand, it's spiritual, it's tactile. At the time, I didn't see leaving the country as having anything to do with love, but I do know it set the trajectory for the rest of my life. In South and Central America, Don's words earlier about truth and seeking truth. In South America, I began learning the truth, well, like about the drug war and how fabricated that was. I saw how agribusiness and timber and mining industries were extracting left and right any resource they wanted with proxy presidents and a supply line of weapons coming from the United States. And in Chile, I saw how Anaconda and the CIA were putting the squeeze on Allende, and from Medellin, Colombia, I watched it play out from 4,000 miles away. It was back half a century, that election in 1970, that ultimately brought her to me. Simple serendipity. I was on that Machu Picchu mountaintop just waiting for her to drop into my trajectory with her Colombiana recipe. She asked if there might be room in my tent for her with me. We listened to the rain all night while we snuggled that we might be warm on this rocky ground. Together we walked the Inca Trail and a mountaintop to scale. Another morning came and we descended that mountain. She boarded that train. She was traveling down, called by Allende to Santiago town. We hugged goodbye. She kissed me on the cheek. She looked me in the eye, and her last words said, "Will you come and be in Chile with me?" Well, I wrote to her, and she wrote to me, and then came time to pack myself up for self-delivery, and it was September of '73. The CIA brought Pinochet, and Henry K. was having his way. Neruda never again to write, Victor never again to play, and Marta, they disappeared her away. I never heard from her again, but I carry a memory, remembering when on a mountaintop when she dropped in and left me with a kiss and a grin, and now an anger and a sadness that I held within. We must be willing to get rid of the life we have planned so as to live the life that is waiting for us. So I returned to the States in '74. I felt like a foreigner for a number of reasons. Certainly there was the anger and the sadness. There was the way news was reported, which is so contrary to places I'd been and things I had experienced in the international news that I had at my disposal in other countries. I was trying to speak my truth here and would get responses like, how does it feel to be back in civilization? Now, remember when Gandhi was asked what he thought about Western civilization? Remember what his response was to that? Right. He said, I think it'd be a great idea. Well, every president in my lifetime certainly has stated the seemingly magical phrase, the United States is the greatest nation on earth. Bill Clinton raised that category when he said this country was the greatest country in human history. And Barack Obama raised it even higher when he said the United States is the one indispensable country in the world. It's been that way for the last 100 years. It will be that way for the next 100 years. Our military has no peer. Well, again, I was intolerant of all of this, and I left the country the following year. I went to West Africa. In 1850, the French economist Frédéric Bastiat wrote in The Law, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men, they create for themselves, in the course of time, a legal system that authorizes it, and a moral system that glorifies it. And we have seen repeatedly in this country that it is a crime to tell the truth. From West Africa, I was there for 3 years, and then I went up to Europe for a while to work, and then I went to East Africa in 1981, which was the same year that William Casey said in the Oval Office, we'll know our misinformation program is complete when everything the U.S. people believe is false. Justine and Balthazar writes, Justine said in Balthazar that we are all hunting for rational reasons to believe in the absurd. And Voltaire told us, those who can be persuaded to believe in absurdities can be persuaded to believe in atrocities. And Arundhati Roy, who I'm sure many of us know, very clearly says, when we know something, we can't unknow it. When we see something, we can't not see it. When we hear it, we can't unhear it. And in Africa, I saw close up, again, how multinational businesses were subjugating, particularly agribusiness, countries' food supply. Because you remember, Henry Kissinger mentored us, when you control the food, you control the country. When you control the oil, when you control the food, you control the people. When you control the oil, you control the country. The illegal, Henry said, was easy. The unconstitutional takes a little longer. But Rachel Carson wrote 60 years ago, the question is whether any civilization can wage relentless war on life without destroying itself and without losing the right to be called civilized. And for Dr. King, it was about love and action. It was about telling the truth. Because, he said, there is no alternative. My conscience, he said, leaves me no other choice. In 1984, I was in East Africa with the United Nations in Somalia, and I got a cable one day from Geneva reprimanding me for a report that I had not sent, but I had given it to my superior. And when I went to him and said, I got this cable from Geneva, and they said they didn't get my report, but I gave it to you, and he said to me, I didn't send it. So I asked him the obvious question, which was, and he gave me the answer, which was, because you told the truth. You can't tell the truth about what's going on here. I should have read the manual. Yeah. I can't go in. There is no time to talk about all the untruths you have been given about Somalia, where al-Shabaab comes from, these alleged pirates and who they really are. But atrocity after atrocity, and when they put a spin on it, and they expect you to believe it, and when you hear it, and that was over and over and over and over and over again, and there's nothing to counter it. And people's lives are on the line. Martha Beck wrote that art is ultimately about telling the truth. If there are people who don't like the truth, well, you have to decide whether you want to do small talk or whether you want to tell your truth. Because when you get away from the truth, you lose the artist in you. When you get away from the truth, it is the beginning of mediocrity. And I suggest all of us here are artists in our own way. Of course, not everybody likes the truth. We all know that. There's consequences for telling the truth. It's controversial. Makes people upset. You know, even in my business, I shouldn't say even, I shouldn't distinguish it so much from others, but when I won at the Kerrville Folk Festival, a promoter came up to me and wanted to give me some advice. He said, you know, you need to write more feel-good songs. And I said, well, I feel really good about my songs. And he said, no, you can't name names. And I said, well, how will people know who I'm talking about if I don't do that? And he was getting a little more impatient, and he said, look, if you offend people, you're not going to get bookings. And I thought for a moment, and I thought, well, there's always Unitarians. Thank you. Love and justice means challenging ourselves daily with what we hear, with new information that may be confrontational to our existing beliefs, that might be painful from a long-held belief. And I have had a few of those, certainly. And it means questioning this mainstream reportage that tags our beliefs, many of our beliefs, as conspiratorial or threatening to national security. In Nicaragua in 1986, we were attacked twice by Contras when I returned to the States. Western Massachusetts, I could not get one reporter to report the story because they said it didn't happen, that I was making it up, because if it had happened, it would have been on the AP line. This is back in the 80s. Well, the AP didn't come to the press conference in Managua, or the UPI, or CBS, or the networks, or the news, the Times, and so forth. Every other outlet, news outlet from the world was there. But it wasn't on the AP line, so it didn't happen. Didn't get reported until a lot of other people came back who had experienced that event, and the Boston Globe ran one article, and then it kind of disappeared. Ben Linder was a contemporary of mine. When he was assassinated, when he was executed, I cried. Ernesto Anaya, I wept when he was murdered. I did a lot of crying. I still do. Last night you heard the song "Woman of Sumpul River" by Claudia Alegria, she talks about people who, what's the phrase again? People who gamble with death for their freedom. And I kept writing songs because I couldn't not write them. There are people, many people, who say, we cannot be sure of having something to live for unless we are willing to die for it. Perhaps like crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And Pablo Casal, in exile in France, wrote the words, artists, we are obligated to speak out for social justice because we have a medium, we have a voice that is listened to when the lecture will not be heard in the same way. It's a long list of thousands of names of people who gamble with death, people who make this commitment to truth and justice. And as we approach those daily forks in our roads, when are the times that we are subjected to intimidation, to fear, to notions of lesser evilness, so that we're afraid to follow our beliefs? Like this one child, what did she say? She stood up for people's rights? What she said? What's right and good doesn't necessarily come easy. It doesn't come naturally. But we have to stand up and fight for it, as if the cause depends on us, because it does. And working for love and justice is a journey, and it's why all of us have come together this morning to do that journey together. Thank you.
John C. Maxwell, who is a minister and also writes for business, arguing it, managing either organization is about the same. He says, people often make a mistake in their personal development when they focus too much on their weaknesses. As a result, they spend all their time trying to shore up those weaknesses instead of maximizing the strengths they possess. This morning, we've heard from someone who has worked very hard on his strengths and has shared them this morning with us. So keep in mind also the words of Robert Schuller. What would you attempt to do if you knew you would not fail? So as we extinguish the chalice, try to make sure that what happens at church doesn't stay at church, that it goes home with you and your family and into the larger community.